The story begins in a remote, beautiful, and rugged place on October 2016 in Zambia, Africa, at a famous hunting reserve called Kafue National Park. An American couple, Larry and Bianca Rudolph, are there. They have been married for 34 years. They're wealthy. Larry is a successful dentist from Pittsburgh. Bianca is his wife, a mother, and over the years, she has become an experienced hunter herself. This safari trip is one of many they have taken together. They were wrapping up their vacation, getting ready to fly back home to the United States. They stayed in a simple two-room cabin. One room is a bedroom, the other is a bathroom. On the morning of October 11th, just as the sun is rising, a single loud gunshot broke the quiet of the African bush. According to Larry Rudolph, he was in the bathroom at that exact moment. He says he heard the terrible blast and ran out. He found his wife, Bianca, lying on the bedroom floor. She had a massive gunshot wound to the left side of her chest. She was bleeding, and she was dead. Next to her was her own shotgun, a Browning 12-gauge. The gun was partly inside its soft-sided zippered carrying case. Larry was devastated, sobbing. He told the people who rushed to help that it was a horrible accident. He explained that Bianca must have been packing up her gun to go home, and somehow it went off. She shot herself completely by mistake. This was the story he gave to the local Zambian police who came to investigate. The police took his statement, looked at the scene, and wrote up their report. They concluded that the firearm, which they believed had been left loaded from the previous day's hunt, had accidentally discharged. A local doctor examined Bianca's body and confirmed the official cause of death, a gunshot wound that destroyed her heart and lung. For the Zambian authorities, the case was sad but straightforward. It was a tragic hunting accident in a place where hunting happens. They saw a grieving husband and a plausible explanation. They had no immediate reason to think anything else occurred. So, with that ruling, Larry Rudolph made the arrangements to deal with his wife's body. He decided very quickly that she should be cremated there in Zambia. He did this just days after she died. He then returned to the United States, to his children, his friends, and his multi-million-dollar dental business, a widower who had suffered a terrible loss on a faraway vacation. But that first simple story of an accident would not hold up. It would crack and fall apart under scrutiny. The first person to doubt it was a man who was there that morning, a man who knew guns and knew the couple's routine. His name was Spencer Kakoma, and he was their professional game scout. His job was to guide them and ensure their safety. And what he saw and heard in the moments after that gunshot did not add up to an accident. His suspicion was the first thread that, when pulled, would begin to unravel everything. Kakoma was working about 30 yards away from the Rudolph's cabin when he heard the blast. He ran straight to the cabin and got there within 15 seconds. Inside, he found the scene we already know. Bianca dead, Larry sobbing. But Spencer noticed small details that didn't fit Larry's story. First, Larry claimed he had just been in the bath or the shower when the gun fired, yet when Spencer arrived, he was fully dressed, wearing his shoes. Secondly, Larry's story changed in those first frantic moments. Through his tears, he first told Spencer that his wife had killed herself, that she had committed suicide. Then, a short time later, he changed it. He said it must have been a terrible accident while she was putting the gun away. But the third and most important thing Spencer knew was about the gun itself. He stated clearly to investigators that he had personally watched Bianca Rudolph unload that exact shotgun earlier that morning. It was standard safety protocol. After their last hunt, before they went into the cabin, they always emptied the guns. He saw her do it with his own eyes. So, in his mind, that Browning shotgun should not have been able to fire at all. Spencer didn't say this to accuse Larry at the time. He was confused and troubled. He helped the distraught husband, even calming him down when Larry ran toward a river talking about drowning himself. But that seed of doubt was planted. Meanwhile, Larry's actions raised another huge red flag for authorities. Just hours after Bianca's death, he was on the phone with the U.S. Embassy in Zambia. He wasn't asking for help with a complex death investigation or grief support. His main urgent question was about how quickly he could have his wife's body cremated. He wanted it done immediately, right there in Africa. He even paid extra money to speed the process. Her body was cremated just 3 days after she died. This rush seemed very strange to people who knew Bianca. To understand why this became a murder case, we have to leave Africa for a moment and look at the life Larry and Bianca Rudolph built back in the United States. Their public life looked perfect. Larry was the rich and powerful owner of a dental empire called Three Rivers Dental Group. He had 5 offices in the Pittsburgh area. He specialized in something called sedation dentistry, which meant he put patients to sleep for complex procedures. This was a very, very lucrative business. He and Bianca lived in a multi-million-dollar world. They had a beautiful home in Pennsylvania and another one in sunny Arizona. They traveled constantly. They were famous in the hunting world, especially Larry, who became the president of a big organization called Safari Club International. They had 2 grown children, a son, Julian, who was a lawyer, and a daughter, Anna, who was also a dentist working in her father's business. From the outside, it was a story of success, family, and shared passion. But inside the walls of the dental offices, almost everyone knew a different story. For about 20 years, Larry had been having an affair with his office manager, a woman named Lori Milleron. A dental assistant named Sherry Hauk, who worked for Larry for 8 years and was a friend of his daughter Anna, said the affair was an open secret. Everyone knew, but no one was allowed to talk about it. It created a tense and uncomfortable atmosphere at work. Sherry described Larry as a man with a terrible temper. She said he could be charming one second and then fly into a rage the next. According to court testimony, in the time right before the Zambia trip, Lori Milleron had given Larry an ultimatum. She told him he had 1 year, just 1 year, to sell his dental practices and finally leave his wife Bianca. So pressure was building from his girlfriend. At the same time, there was pressure from his wife. Bianca had found out about the long-term affair. Friends said she wanted Lori fired from the business. She also wanted more control over the couple's massive finances, which were estimated to be worth about $27 million. Divorce would have been a messy, public, and very expensive disaster for a man like Larry. It would have meant splitting his fortune, hurting his reputation, and likely losing his business partner and daughter, Anna, who was close to her mother. So in 2016, Larry Rudolph was in a very difficult position, trapped between a girlfriend demanding he finally choose her and a wife demanding he put an end to the affair and share his money. The trip ended with a gunshot, and with Bianca gone, Larry's problems seemed to vanish. He collected millions in life insurance, moved his girlfriend into his home, and continued his luxurious life. This is the context that made the accident in Africa look so suspicious to investigators. It gave Larry a powerful motive. Now, let's talk about the science. The FBI spent 5 years building their case. They weren't just listening to stories about affairs and money. They were testing the physical facts of that morning in the cabin. Their job was to prove beyond any doubt that what Larry described could not have happened. They started with the basics of the accident story. Larry claimed Bianca was packing her shotgun into its soft-sided case when it fired, shooting her in the chest. The FBI brought in experts to test every part of this claim. First, they tested whether Bianca, who was 5 feet 4 inches tall, could even physically reach the trigger of that long gun while trying to put it in a bag. They got 15 women who were the same size as Bianca. They gave them a dummy shotgun of the exact same model and length. They asked them to try to reach the trigger while pretending to slide the gun into a soft case. The result was clear. It was extremely difficult, almost impossible. A woman of her height would have had to bend and contort in an unnatural way, forcing the gun at a strange angle. Next, they tested the gun itself. Could it just go off if bumped or dropped? This is called a drop test. They took the same model of Browning shotgun and dropped it over and over from a height of about 4.5 feet onto a hard concrete floor. They did this many times. The gun never fired. It never accidentally discharged. So the idea that it could have just fired on its own while being gently placed into a soft bag was not supported by the evidence. But the most powerful science came from the wound on Bianca's body. This evidence existed because of that suspicious U.S. Embassy official, the former Marine. Before Bianca was cremated, he took detailed photographs and measurements of her injury. This evidence became the heart of the FBI's case. The science of shotgun wounds is very specific. If the muzzle of the gun is pressed directly against the skin, a contact wound, the blast goes straight into the body. The pellets don't have space to spread out. They stay in a tight group, making a hole about the size of the gun barrel, which is roughly 1 inch across. But if the gun is fired from a distance, the pellets have room to fan out. They make a wider, more spread out pattern. The photographs of Bianca's chest wound showed a spread of pellets that was about 2.5 inches in diameter. Using this data, the FBI's ballistics experts calculated the firing distance. To create a 2.5-inch pattern with that specific shotgun, the muzzle had to be between 2 feet and 3.5 feet away from her body when the trigger was pulled. This was the scientific knockout punch to Larry's story. It proved Bianca was not handling the gun when it fired. She was not packing it. She was standing several feet away from it. Someone else was holding the gun, pointing it at her from across the room, and fired. The FBI's conclusion was simple and devastating. Bianca Rudolph was murdered. With the science proving it was murder, the FBI now focused on proving who did it and why. The who seemed clear. Only 2 people were in that remote cabin, Bianca and Larry. So it wasn't a stranger, it had to be Larry. But for a jury to convict, they needed to show a powerful reason, a motive. The FBI found 2 big motives, both about control and money. The first was the affair. Lori Milleron's 1-year ultimatum created a deadline. If Larry didn't leave his wife, he might lose his girlfriend of 20 years. The second motive was Bianca herself. Now aware of the affair, she was making demands. More importantly, she wanted more say in the couple's massive fortune. Friends indicated she might even be considering a divorce, which under Arizona law could have meant giving half of everything to her. For a controlling man like Larry, this was unacceptable. But there was a third, more direct financial motive, life insurance. The FBI discovered Larry Rudolph had taken out not 1 or 2, but 9 different life insurance policies on his wife. The total value was $4.8 million, and he moved with stunning speed to collect the money. The first insurance claim was filed on October 31, 2016, just 20 days after Bianca died. With this money, he immediately upgraded his lifestyle. He bought 2 incredibly expensive luxury cars, an Aston Martin DB11 and a Bentley Bentayga. He and Lori Milleron began living together openly, splitting time between his mansion in Arizona, his place in Pittsburgh, and a vacation home in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. His life after Bianca's death looked like the life of a man who had hit the jackpot, not a grieving widower. The FBI also looked into Larry's past business dealings and found a pattern. They alleged that his entire wealth was built on fraud. They claimed that in 2006, he intentionally shot off his own thumb in Zambia to collect millions in disability insurance. They also alleged he cheated his own dental patients, drilling unnecessary holes in their teeth while they were sedated to bill for costly root canals. This painted a picture of a man who saw insurance payouts and other people's money as a way to fuel his luxurious life. The motive for killing Bianca, therefore, wasn't about needing money to survive. Larry was already rich. It was about gaining total control. Control to be with his mistress without a costly divorce, control over all his money, and a multi-million-dollar insurance windfall on top of it all. He could solve all his problems in one violent act. The financial paper trail and the testimony about the ultimatum showed the jury exactly what he had to gain from his wife's death. The final pieces of the case came together in a federal courtroom in Denver, Colorado in 2022. Larry Rudolph stood trial for the federal crimes of murder abroad and mail fraud for sending those insurance claims through the postal system. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution's case was built like a brick wall. They laid the foundation with the unshakable forensic science, but they also had a witness who gave the jury a shocking inside look into Larry's mind after the murder. A bartender from Phoenix named Brian Lovelace took the stand. He testified that in early 2020, he was working at a high-end steakhouse when Larry Rudolph and Lori Milleron came in. They got into a loud, heated argument at their table. Lovelace stated that over the music, he clearly heard Larry shout at Lori, "I killed my fucking wife for you." This was a bombshell. Larry Rudolph later testified in his own defense. He claimed the bartender misheard him. He said what he actually yelled was, "Now they're saying I killed my fucking wife for you," referring to the FBI's investigation. But the jury had to decide which version of the story they believed.
The other key figure, Lori Millerin, had her own legal trouble. She had been called to testify before the grand jury that initially indicted Larry. Under oath, she lied. She minimized the affair and lied about what she and Larry discussed after Bianca's death. For this, she was charged separately, not with murder, but with perjury and obstruction of justice. She was found guilty and later sentenced to 17 years in federal prison. For Larry's trial, the defense argued there was no solid proof. They said the Zambian police were right the first time. It was an accident. They argued Larry had no financial motive because he was already worth tens of millions. They tried to poke holes in the FBI's science. But after hearing all the evidence, from the physics of the shotgun blast to the bartender's testimony, the jury didn't believe the accident story. They found Lawrence Rudolph guilty on all counts.
The consequences of that guilty verdict arrived in the summer of 2023. In a Denver courtroom, Larry Rudolph, then in his late 60s, stood to receive his sentence. Larry Rudolph was sentenced to spend the rest of his natural life in a federal penitentiary with no possibility of parole. He will die behind bars. On top of that, the judge hit him with financial penalties exceeding $15 million, aiming to claw back the insurance money and impose crippling fines. His legal team stated they would appeal the conviction, a process that continues but faces very long odds. The legal chapter was closing, but the personal fallout for the Rudolph family was far from over. The two children, Julian and Anna, found themselves in a painfully awkward position. Publicly, they have said very little about their mother's death or their father's conviction, but in court filings, they revealed a difficult financial and emotional struggle. With their father going to prison for life, they now control what remains of his finances. The government, however, is demanding those multi-million-dollar penalties. The children have argued in court that they should be considered the true victims of the insurance fraud, not just the insurance companies. They say they have suffered considerable financial harm because the government is trying to take the money that would one day be their inheritance. They are asking the court for restitution, essentially wanting to keep some of the assets. The prosecution has fought this, arguing the children are not being punished, but they also should not get to keep money that came from their father's criminal scheme, a scheme that involved murdering their mother. For Anna and Julian, losing their mother was followed by the horror of their father's trial and conviction, and now they are left to untangle the toxic financial legacy he created. So, what can we learn from this whole long story? It's a case that shows how the truth can be hidden but not destroyed. Larry Rudolph almost got away with murder. In the end, the system, though it moved slowly for 5 long years, worked. The FBI's patience and thoroughness, the bravery of witnesses who came forward, and the application of forensic science delivered justice for Bianca Rudolph. Her story is a tragic one, of a life ended by the person who should have protected her. But it is also a story that shows that even in the most remote corners of the world, with enough persistence and truth, justice can find its target. The hunter, ultimately, became the one who was caught. I thank you all for coming with me on this deep dive. Do well to leave a like if you enjoyed this video, and as always, I will be seeing you on our next episode.